Hey, everybody. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Ashley Duwel. For those of you who don't know me, I am CEO of Dual Dev LLC, and thank you for joining us live at the GovCon Hacks podcast. Unfortunately, Natasha is not able to join us tonight, so it's just going to be me being a talking head, and you know how much I love that. So I had a plan to talk about funding. However, I definitely think that there would be value in having Natasha present for that conversation. So I actually did a presentation earlier this week. I presented on Govology, and it was a system for award management and dynamic small business search presentation. And I have to say, after the 1 hour presentation, we had one of the most robust Q&A sessions that I think I have ever been a part of on any live webinar. So based on the questions that I received, I think there were like 36 in the chat in the Q&A box. A lot of them were the same. So I thought if they're struggling with it, the attendees of that presentation, chances are that there are folks in our audience that are also struggling with getting through SAM and understanding the nuances of the physical address, the systems that are used in cross-referencing, etc. So there are, let me sort of back up a little bit. There are some trainings out there, some folks who are providing resources, and whether that be YouTube videos or Instagram or whatever the case might be, stating that the first step to government contracting is to register in SAM. And I'm going to argue that point because we don't necessarily know what market exists in government contracting for what it is that we do until we've done the market research, right? To add to that, part of what we need to enter in SAM, we need to know prior to registering. For example, our NAICS codes and our product service codes. So the common guidance provided is, oh, pick a NAICS code. You can go to census.gov/NAICS and look through the NAICS codes. That is true. But the NAICS code that you perceive uh, your product or service to be sold under may or may not be the NAICS code that the government or all government agencies use consistently to procure your products and services. So I want to make a reference to a video that's on my YouTube channel already. For those of you who aren't following, it is youtube.com/@GovConHacks. And that video will show you it's how to find your NAICS and product service codes based on market spending. So I'm not going to go through that in this podcast, but that's the first step, even before you register in SAM. Now, the second step, um, you know, aside from creating your SAM account, that kind of stating the obvious, is going to be your documents. SAM, or GSA rather, does provide a documents matrix, and I'll be sure to link that in this live afterwards. But that documents matrix will tell you more or less which documents you can supply to prove, number one, your physical address, your company name, and the third point is your formation date. So your formation date and your company name are both covered by your articles of organization, certificate of formation, depending on the state you're in. Sometimes they vary in what they refer to those documents as. The physical address, while you can prove that physical address via multiple documents, whatever you submit also has to be the same as what the IRS has on file. And that's the trick to it. Because I have a lot of business owners, they'll form their LLC, and then when they go to register in SAM, they say, oh no, SAM's public. I don't want my information to be public. And they'll go and change their address to like a post office box or a virtual address that doesn't have a lease agreement accompanying it. and they'll get held up in this sort of endless cycle of validation. And either they get through validation and they fail at the end, or it's just repetitive validation correcting errors. Now, in the same respect to that, DBA also plays a role. SAM does not accept a DBA unless you have evidence and paperwork proving it. So if you registered your company name with the Secretary of State when you formed your business as Dual Dev, LLC, then everything subsequently that you do should match exactly that. And same with your physical address. So I've had multiple folks had to change their address 2 or 3 times to get it to pass through all the way, because SAM happens in 2 phases when you're registering. You have your validation phase, and then you have your cage phase, which essentially is IRS validation and cage validation with the DLA. And all of the information that you enter up until that point actually is going to be cross-referenced at the end. So if you don't have the same address entered in SAM as what the IRS has on file, and I mean down to the comma, believe it or not. So if, for example, you live on Bishop Lane and you spell out LANE, or you work from home and your house, your residence address, office address is Bishop Lane, LANE. Don't try to put LN period in SAM because it'll cause you issues. As long as you make sure that everything matches, you can proceed with validation and rest assured that at the end of the process, when you do go to submit your entire registration, that IRS validation and cage validation will pass through. Now, a lot of times, especially when you're brand new, um, this doesn't always happen with those renewals, those folks who have been registered for a while, even though they too did have some trouble with the last updates in April 2022. There isn't much consistency, or hadn't been in the past, or hadn't been any rules or regulations or checks and balances that forced all databases to be accurate. But when DUNS changed from DUNS number to the UEI, or when SAM started using a new contractor and thus changed the identifier to UEI, which stands for Unique Entity Identifier, it sort of brought on an onslaught of system issues that they weren't expecting. So the issues did not discriminate whether you were new or whether you were renewing at that point in time. But if you are brand new in SAM now, 9 times out of 10, DLA during that DLA validation, after submission and after your IRS validation, DLA will send you an email and they're going to ask for additional information. Sometimes they want confirmation of your physical address. They usually ask for confirmation of the business owner's email. And that really is to protect you. There are some third parties out there who provide SAM services who have a vested interest to make sure, um, that they receive your alerts and notifications. So they've kind of put an extra layer of protection in there to make sure that you're actually in control and administrator of your SAM. So they don't want that email address as the government business point of contact to go to anyone other than you as the business owner. And then thirdly, they usually will request your lease. So if you have a rented office space, if you have a home office, they'll usually ask you to confirm which type it is. And then if you answer anything other than home office, they typically want to see your lease agreement. And that's where most with PO boxes or virtual addresses get stuck. But if you're able to get a verification letter for your address, you may be able to, in recent weeks, get through that DLA validation. But there does have to be documented evidence that they have to put on file as part of the process. So just be ready for that. Now, in SAM, There are a lot of federal acquisition regulations, and they don't make it easy, really, in some of the more complex DFARs to understand because, they'll have the little link that cites the rule, but then when you get to that rule, there's 3 more hyperlinks or 3 more different rules, and you have to figure out which of those apply to you. Um, I've seen thousands of business owners kinda rush through those, they don't really understand them, but they attest and agree. Now, it's very important that even if you do attest and agree and submit, go back and read those rules. Familiarize yourself with those rules because, in the instance that you may have answered one or more of those clauses incorrectly, all it takes is, for a competitor to protest your bid. If they can detect the error, based on their knowledge of the industry, the compliance. A lot of new contractors sort of face that scrutiny from those who have been in the industry. And sometimes, if you win a contract away from the incumbent and the incumbent believes they should have had it and they protest that contract, they could potentially win if the government finds that there was an error or a non compliance issue with your SAM registration. So, do be cognizant of that. There are some of us out here who do process SAM registrations, who are not charging exuberant fees, who are not trying to hijack your registrations. And in 2023, more so than any other year in my career, business owners have wanted to kind of offload that. They went through the rules, they understand what they agreed to, they understand the compliance, and now they want to just get it off their plate. We see that a lot. There's no shame or blame in that regardless of what anybody tells you. It's really a matter of what is your time worth. Um, so as far as SAM goes, a lot of folks think that once they hit that submit button and they get the DLA email, they respond within that 3-day window and they get their cage code. Oh, finally, I'm done. Well, not quite. So in that approval email, if you read about halfway down, they are encouraging you to complete what's called a notarized entity administrator letter. And the templates have recently updated. That is another area of YouTube video topics that we have covered is pretty much a step-by-step walkthrough on how to submit that letter through the Federal Service Desk. And what that does is that points you as entity administrator of your registration, and that's what you want. And then thereafter, if you determine that you would like an employee to manage it or a third party to manage it or whoever, you as administrator then have the ability to designate roles. That could be a data entry role, compliance, reporting, or so on. So that is a much more convenient way, I must say. SAM has come leaps and bounds since it first came out in 2011. And just for a matter of record, those of you who have been in this industry as long as I have know that it was 2011 and not 2012, like it's claimed today. But when SAM was released, believe it or not, there was a lot of issues. The system was down. There were so many issues that if you checked certain boxes, it was impossible to submit. So for 6 to 9 months, contractors were having a hard time getting paid because their SAMs were lapsing. The queue was so backlogged that Federal Service Desk couldn't keep up. And they still had to show up to work and they still had to foot that bill, but they weren't getting paid for it. So it was a very tumultuous time. And SAM is part of like a sort of 20-year, 25-year IT overhaul that the government did. So SAM is actually a combination of what was formerly known as FedBizOps. We have ORCA, EPLS, the Central Contracting Registry, CCR. That used to be what issued your cage code. And there's a fourth system that's not coming to me, so apologies for that. But basically, you previously to 2012, 2011, you had to obtain a federal contract register in each one of these systems separately. So I got to keep reminding myself, and while we're out here complaining about how challenging it is just to get registered and maintain compliance. I mean, there is a cost of doing business with the government. And while there is a promise, well, not even a promise, but a reasonable expectation for most industries that they could, sort of recession proof their small business with some long-term government contracts, but it does take building relationships with the right agencies. And that's one of the reasons that your SAM and DSBS is so important. Believe it or not, for any acquisition professional that's out here, feel free to back me up. But when you have been doing this acquisition thing for 10 years or more, you tend to be able to look at a DSBS profile or a SAM registration and immediately tell which contractors, are on top of their stuff and which ones aren't. There is a level of responsibility and responsiveness that is expected in government contracting. So if your DSBS profile has a bunch of blanks and missing information, you're going to immediately look non-responsive before you ever even have the opportunity to place that bid. So I know that there's a lot of buzz around submitting offers and bidding and proposals and pricing right now, and not enough emphasis on the foundations that will help you set your business apart from your competitors immediately. I mean, it's no secret. There's a lot of competition in this industry right now for a lot of the same contracts. Everyone is trying to get funded to do this or that. And, you know, that pool is very small. I don't hear of a lot of folks anymore. And if you're out there, please prove me wrong. I don't hear of a lot of folks saying, I have this really great idea for an innovative product or this new software that could really help the government. I know there's a gap and I have a solution. That's traditionally prior to maybe 3 years ago when this whole middleman came up. Government contracting was all about solutions. What solutions could you bring to meet your customers' pain points? And that's essentially what business is, right? If if we all started a business not knowing, is there even a market for what it is that I'm selling? Um, a lot of it's already difficult. A lot of more than 50% of businesses will fail in their first 5 years. I think that statistic is. So having something that you can sell both commercially and to the government is the best path. I mean, why limit yourself to just one line of business? But back to SAM and DSBS. So in SAM, there's going to be more than one NAICS code and more than one product service code in most cases that's applicable to you. So if I'm looking at a SAM profile and I see one NAICS code, unless that one NAICS code is, you know, janitorial services, um, I'm gonna probably wonder, hey, did you do your market research? Because I know there's more that apply to you. And when we only pick one, we're only looking typically for one NAICS code when we look for opportunities. And when we do that, we end up missing more than what we're seeing. So that's the downside of not performing the market research first and at least kind of exploring your market, looking to see what's out there. And feel free to check out that video. I believe I used the janitorial use case in that video, but replicate the same steps that I showed in the video for any industry that you happen to be in, product or service. You might find that some agencies could refer to what you sell using different terminology than others. And, what comes to mind for an anecdote on that would be a use case. I had a very experienced contractor come to me. He had 60% of his market share already. He was very, dedicated his life to water purification. And he sold both products and services in that industry. He had found and conquered all of the business that he possibly had under his NAICS code. And he knew there was more work out there, He knew that more agencies were buying, but he couldn't find it because he was looking like tunnel vision. And, it took a little bit of playing around with the keywords, but not very long for me to figure out that 40% of the market wasn't using water purification at all. They were actually using water filtration to as terminology in their contracts. So, and it was going under a completely different NAICS code. So it never came up on his radar. Needless to say, very, very happy customer. Um, Definitely, I hope that he's doing well and that he conquered the rest of the market. But a lot of the answers that we seek is in the data, what's already happened. A great way to predict what the government will do is to look at what they've already done because roughly 70% of what they buy over and over and over. So if you know who buys what you sell and how they buy what you sell, you have just shortened your sales cycle because why sit around and wait for the perfect solicitation? That's where everyone else is. All of your competitors are all just sitting on SAM.gov waiting for that perfect one, trying to stick a square peg in a round hole in a lot of cases. But if you approach this strategically, make sure that your profiles are robust, filled in completely. And I know there are some out there that will argue with me about whether or not it's mandatory to have product service codes on your SAM registration. I will say no, it is not mandatory. It is strategic because product service codes will further break down that industry code because that's all the NAICS code is North American Industry Classification System code. And with it being an industry classification, it's not meant to define what it is that you actually do. A funny story about the NAICS system, true story, it was used for budget tracking, just so the government can tell, where the money is going. Another true story about NAICS codes, and I challenge you to prove me wrong on this. Go on usaspending.gov, and as long as we have been tracking United States spending, never once has a transaction been recorded without a product service code. But you will find that there were transactions recorded that left the government as purchases without a NAICS code. It does not happen often, I will be the first to admit, but it has happened. They're just not a required field in SAM. That doesn't mean that you should skip them. All right, let's talk for a moment with what time we have left about those DSBS changes. We do also have an updated video on our YouTube. It's called How and Why, Dynamic Small Business Search, or Why and How. I might have those two transposed. Either way, it's a recent video on our channel. What happened was about last summer, maybe fall, the SBA sort of overnight picked up DSBS, Subnet, the HubZone portal from General Login System and moved it over to connect.sba.gov. Now, I'm grateful for the change. Don't get me wrong. Please don't take this as a complaint because Connect is a much better and more user-friendly system than the likes of General Login System. It's also instantaneous. You don't have to wait for SBA to manually approve your request to connect your profile anymore. So watch that video. It is very easy. Just go through the steps. It'll take you 3 minutes. And you are looking for basically any blank. Now, some information will port over from your SAM registration. That includes your NAICS codes, your self-certifications for your socioeconomics. That includes some information that you had entered along the way. I think your website comes over, a couple other things, contact information. So anything in a gray box you can't change in DSBS. You have to change that in SAM. There also is an area for your certifications. Now, checking the box in SAM, as you know, as of January 1st of this year, self-certifications are no longer accepted. So if you do check a box in SAM for socioeconomics, whether that's woman-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned, there is an expectation that you are progressing through that certification process. Until you do get certified with the certifying entity, depending on the certification, you will not be able to bid on set aside contracts. So, with that in mind, um, there are your self certifications at DSBS, but then also your SBA approved certifications. And once you complete your certification process, SBA will be the ones to update that for you. The manual entries that you need to worry about are your capability narrative, which pretty much is your elevator pitch. Same thing that's also on your capability statement. It should be a compelling, say, 2 to 3 sentences about what you do well. um, don't lead with your set asides, guys. There's two other places to tell the government that your profile tells the government, rather, that you're woman owned or that you're minority owned or you're veteran owned. Don't waste space in your capability statement for it. My colleague at RSM Federal, Josh Frank, huge shout out. He is a genius. If you don't follow him in government contracting or haven't read any of his books, I would highly encourage you do so. But Josh Frank says that and I agree, by the way, when you lead with your set asides, you are telling your buyer that you believe your value is in your set aside and not what you actually do or what your business does. So keep that in mind as you're constructing this copy. The next thing is going to be a link for your capability statement. Preferably, this would be a link that's like hosted on your website, but some of you newer contractors may not have your website up. Um, the next best thing would be to host it, as a publicly accessible link in your Google Drive or your OneDrive. Just make sure that you change those sharing settings to account for, um, those not being a member of your team. So change it to public view and just paste that link right in there until you do get a nice government landing page on your website. We'll have to talk about those in a future session. If anybody is trying to do a government landing page or a website, feel free to reach out to us. We are digital productivity gurus at Dual Dev, so we help with all design, marketing, and operational efficiency. So the keywords are probably your next most important sort of tool for visibility and exposure, right? Because your keywords will allow you to articulate your core competencies in a way that is non-existent in your NAICS or your product service code descriptions. So it's your opportunity to think about search engine optimization, right? What is someone who's looking for my services gonna look for me? What are they gonna type into Google? For me personally, maybe they'll type in government contracting coach. Maybe they'll type in Monday.com partner or expert or developer. So all of those keywords I would place in my profile. And I'll encourage you to do the same. Sometimes this takes a little bit of thinking through, and you're probably going to always want to go back in and optimize them. I'll walk away and, oh, I wish I would have said this, or I wish I would have put that. Well, the good news is all it takes is a quick update and you can just add the keywords in there. Percentage of business activity, if you're 100% service, construction, manufacturing, and then you have what am I missing here? There's definitely more. Oh, your bonding. So if you are required to have service bonding or construction bonding, there's an area to put your bonding limits. And references. Can't forget references. And this is especially important for those of you who are brand new, you're just starting out. You might even just be one person, but you have a vested interest to maybe appear a little bigger on the outside, right? Um, Having a reference in your profile for someone who has never they haven't even looked at your capability statement yet. I'm the government. I'm performing market research to see if there's enough small businesses to set something aside. I haven't even gotten to your capability statement yet to see that you've done this work before, but you put references in there for me. Now you're immediately in my mind making yourself look a little bit of a lower risk because, you didn't just wake up this morning and decide you want a government contract. So whether that's, a commercial client, it doesn't have to be a government client, whether that's somebody that you performed work for, even professionally. As long as you're clear about your role, have a reference, someone that can vouch for you, even if just one. All right, guys. Well, we are out of time for the day. I want to thank those of you who joined us for the live. And if you couldn't make it this evening, go ahead and catch us on YouTube at youtube.com/at GovConHacks. You can always catch us in our Facebook group. So mine is Government Contracting Community. And then you also have Government Contract Networking. That is Natasha's group. So I want to thank everybody for joining us. And please, please, please make sure you keep sending us your questions so that we can keep producing the content that will help you the most in your government contracting strategy. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.